Okay, well, thank you. So this will be slightly informal. So welcome everyone to Train the Trainer regarding the EIDL Targeted Advances. This is presented by the City of Oakland Economic Development Team and AnewAmerica. And would like to give the opportunity to Marissa if she wants to say a few words.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Steve. Good morning, everybody. I'm Marissa Raya with City of Oakland Economic Development. My colleagues, Susanna, Harry, Tamara, and hopefully Gil, Juno, and Eric will also be joining or watching this session in its recording. We have been doing our best to connect Oakland businesses with local, state, and federal funding opportunities to help recover from being forced to close during shelter in place, and landed on this targeted EIDL as one of the best opportunities for our businesses in East and West Oakland who have not applied successfully for federal funds at the same rates as downtown and North Oakland businesses. So we really wanted to offer in-person assistance to East and West Oakland located businesses to apply for the economic injury disaster loan, primarily because applicants who are eligible, who can demonstrate loss and are in low-income communities that have been mapped by the SBA, will be invited to apply for an advance grant. And that is a $10,000 or up to $15,000 grant, and I think would just be such a significant impact for many of our businesses. And I want to thank our business serving partners that are going to be working with us to help their businesses in their network apply.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
And I'm Steve Dials. I'm the CEO of AnewAmerica, and again, we have Darlene Neal, who is the director of our Women's Business Center in Oakland. So a couple of disclosures before we get started. So we have women's business centers in San Jose and in Oakland, and they are in part funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration. So, however, any opinions, conclusions, recommendations that are given in this do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Small Business Administration. We are also a resource partner to the U.S. Small Business Administration. And the session is being recorded, and if you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect. Now, the COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan, just to give a brief overview, the purpose, is to meet financial obligations and expenses that were due to impact by COVID-19, is to be used for working capital, normal expenses. For for-profit entities, the interest rate is at 3.75 fixed. For nonprofit entities, the interest rate is at 2.75. It's a 30-year term. There are no prepayment penalties for the economic injury disaster loan, and this loan is non-forgivable. Now, a reason that I want to bring this up is because in order to be considered for the EIDL Advances, one must apply for the economic injury disaster loan. And also, just to emphasize that for small businesses, they really should consider this as an alternative if they need capital for their business. The interest rates are favorable, the terms are flexible, so maybe as opposed to some other options, whether it's trying to use a credit card, whether it's going to online to a fintech lender, you want to really be aware of the terms. And the terms of the economic injury disaster loan are quite favorable if someone needs that to help support their business. So as part of the program for the economic injury disaster loan, there are what's called EIDL Advances. And we will go into each one, but these conditions apply regardless, whether it's the targeted EIDL advance or whether it's the supplemental. So if an advance is approved, it does not have to be paid back. So that's important. That if, for example, I apply for a COVID-19 EIDL loan, and in the process, I am approved for a $10,000 advance, that $10,000 for the advance, I do not need to pay back. It will not be considered a loan. The other thing is, again, as I mentioned, that in order to be considered for the advance, you have to apply for the COVID-19 EIDL loan. You don't apply for the EIDL loan, you're not going to be considered for the advance. And Marissa.
Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to confirm with you that on the SBA's webpage for the targeted EIDL, right at the top, it says you do not need to be approved for the loan or accept the loan to receive the advance.
Right, so there are two components to it. So let's say, because the way that the EIDL loan works, there's no specific loan amount that someone can say, I want $50,000 for my business. Loan amounts are determined solely by the SBA based upon the application and any supporting documentation. So say, for example, today I submit my application. Tuesday, they look at my application and they say, well, based upon where he resides, based upon our other eligibility, requirements, we want to extend an invitation for a $10,000 EIDL advance. They extend that invitation to me, I get it. Let's say 20 days into the process, they come back and they say, you know what? We can't approve you for the EIDL loan. Okay. That $10,000 that they made a determination that I qualified for an advance, once they give it to me, that's it. I don't need to repay it. That is considered an advance. Okay. So there are instances where someone may receive an advance, but on the EIDL loan, they might be declined. So again, once you do an application, it is reviewed to see the eligibility of the advances. And if the advances are approved, they're separate from the loan component of the EIDL application. The other thing that's really important is that the EIDL advances are by invitation only. Okay, you have to be notified by the SBA that we are inviting you to take advantage, to apply for the targeted advance. So again, it is by invitation. And the only way to get that invitation is to apply for the COVID-19 EIDL loan. Other thing, there are eligibility requirements that must be met, for the advances, and we'll get into that. The other thing is that if someone is approved for an EIDL loan, they do not have to accept that loan, even if they received an EIDL advance. So if, for example, I was approved for a $10,000 advance, then 20 days later, the SBA comes to me and says, you know what? We have also approved you for a $50,000 EIDL loan. I can say, you know what? I do not want to accept it. That $10,000 that I received for the advance, I keep. There's no repayment necessary. So again, those components are separate. Other thing that's important is that people must have filed their 2019 tax returns in order to be eligible. Okay. If someone did not file their 2019 tax returns, they are not eligible. So part of the process that happens as part of the documentation, if someone gets an invitation, is that they must complete the IRS's 4506 form. So basically that's the form saying that an entity can get access to the tax return that was filed with the IRS. Okay. So if someone did not file their 2019 tax returns, okay, they will not be eligible. So now getting into the different advances. So the first one is the COVID-19 targeted EIDL advance. So this provides up to $10,000. Some of the criteria are you have to be located in a low income community. And on the SBA site, they have provided a mapping tool that individuals can use to see if they're in a low income community. So the mapping tool is accessed through the link that's in the presentation, and we will go there. So there's the disclosure, kind of gives an idea what's the purpose of the tool, how to use it. And once you click on that, a map will come up. And the easiest way are for individuals to use the location and to type in their address. So we will type in our Fruitvale location. So then by that address, it shows that the location is in a low income community. So again, this is the mapping tool that individuals can use to help determine the low income eligibility for the advance. Then the other thing is for the targeted advance, you have to be able to demonstrate that you had a 30% reduction in revenue during an 8-week period beginning on the 2nd of March in 2020. And you have to have 300 or less employees. The other targeted advance is what is called the COVID-19 supplemental targeted EIDL advance. What that is targeted for is to really try to reach the most hardest hit businesses. So again, they need to be located in a low income community, and the mapping tool is available for use. This provides $5,000 to those that are eligible. The difference with this one is that they have to demonstrate that they had more than 50% of an economic loss during that 8-week period, and when you compare it to the same period in the prior year. So again, for this one, it's more than a 50% economic loss that has to be demonstrated, and they can only have 10 or less employees.
Quick question, Steve.
Sure.
All the other conditions apply for the other one that, as you said, you have to file the tax return.
Yes.
So all the others apply for that as well too.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And I'll just briefly try to. So for this slide, the COVID-19 EIDL Advances, all of these conditions, they apply to both, whether it's the targeted or supplemental.
Steve, I had a question,
Sure.
if this is the appropriate time, about the invitation. My understanding is it's an email. Do we know what the from address is for that email? And from the time the application is submitted, how long does it typically take before that invitation arrives? Because I think we'll need to give really clear instructions to folks after the workshops that in 2 days or 2 weeks, look for an email from this email address with your invitation.
Okay, so it should come from an address that will have sba.gov at the end of it. Then the other thing is, so as of yesterday, because we had a call with the SBA for SBA employees and for SBA resource partners. So as of yesterday, they had a backlog of about 600,000 applications. They have put some processes in place where they hope that by the end of July, that they bring the backlog down to 0. So in terms of managing expectations, I would suggest that you let people know that this could take a few weeks for them to hear back from the SBA, and that it is due to the volume that they have and the process of what they're doing in terms of really going back and trying to review pretty much all the EIDL applications to see if now individuals would benefit from the targeted or supplemental. So for example, if someone early on, maybe they got an advance of about 2,000, they're looking at those applications to see, okay, will this person qualify for additional 8,000? So again, because of the volume, I would just suggest to really, manage people's, time expectations.
I appreciate that insight. And the subject line is probably fairly clear on the email, would you say?
Yeah, I would, just suggest that, people check their spam, and also just, be aware that there are entities that are trying to commit fraud and things like that. And we know all about, masking emails, things like that. So I could get an email that says, disaster loan SBA, but when I look at the actual email, it's from sdial@gmail. So again, just trying to help people to be aware of maybe some of the things, guardrails they need to take into, consideration, and to also leverage the SBA's hotline. So maybe I got an email and I'm uncertain about it. They can always call the SBA, and the SBA will verify it, with them. And here are a couple of important reminders. So no one should submit a duplicate COVID-19 EIDL application. If there are instances where I was confused and I saw this email, I didn't know who it was from, but I think you might have reconsidered me. Okay, there's a process where those who have already applied can check on if an invitation was sent to them and also try to request reevaluation. But again, no one should submit a duplicate, COVID-19 EIDL application. The maximum combined amount for both the targeted and the supplemental, if people are eligible, is $15,000. So that's assuming that I get $10,000 for the advance, then also I meet the criteria for the supplemental, which is $5,000. That's the max that I would be able to get in terms of the EIDL advances. Again, just reinforce that the way that the process works now is that the SBA, based upon someone's EIDL application, then reviews it for eligibility for one of the advanced programs. You got to apply. So the only way to be considered for an EIDL advance, you have to apply for an EIDL loan. And of course, yeah.
So it indicated, you said that the prior EIDL applications are reviewed for eligibility. That happens automatically. There's nothing, you don't have to trigger anything. That's automatically done by them. If you submitted a previous EIDL application during that required time period, it's automatically reviewed for eligibility for an advance.
Right. So they have been reviewing applications that were turned in to see, hey, do they, will they qualify now that we've changed this, now that we've done that? So that's part of the reason for that backup in terms of number of loans.
Got it.
Okay. So if someone applied for EIDL last year, and yes, things have changed, and they do want to check in on, they're concerned about not wanting to do a duplicate application and do want to check in on their existing application, what should they do?
Here, give me 1 second, and we'll go there. So, and this is on one of the links that we have. So, for instance, I think that I qualify, but I don't have an invitation. They can call the SBA's Disaster Customer Service Center at the number listed, the 1-800-659-2955. Or they can also email, targeted advance. Now, for individuals who may have been declined for an advance, or maybe, I did an EIDL application in November and I didn't get an advance for whatever reason. And I'm thinking, hey, I want someone to look at it. Then they should email the targeted advance reevaluation at the SBA. Most critical thing is for them to include the submission number of their original application. So then we get to the actual application. So to apply, have to apply online. The application has been streamlined, and it's been significantly streamlined. Couple of points: the application has to be fully completed in order to move forward, to move to the next page. Applicants should read and understand all the disclosures that are listed. Now, the application, it has to be submitted in English. However, There are informational tools in various languages that can be used so that people can understand what's being asked and the process in a language that's most comfortable for them. So, and here is just a sample of the online application. And there are different points of eligibility. So the first one, you must choose one. So is a business with no more than 500, is an individual who operates under a sole proprietorship. So it's important to read through these and to choose what impacts the business entity. Now, on this section, if an applicant, if they cannot check any box under this section, they're not eligible. So again, you know, and it's just, are you engaged in any illegal activity? And the caveat is any illegal activity that's defined by federal guidelines. So for example, you know, if I have a cannabis business, okay, under state guidelines, it's fine. Under federal guidelines, it's not. So again, you know, it's important that people read through and understand what's being asked for. The other thing, no principal applicant with a 50% or greater interest is more than 60 days delinquent on child support obligation. Applicant doesn't present live performances that might be of a sexual nature, and the amount of income that might come from certain types of products or services. So that's important, okay? Gambling, you know, no more than a third of gross annual revenue from legal gambling activities. They're not lobbyists, and that they're not a state, local, municipal entity, and they are not a member of Congress. So again, applicants need to be able to check all of these boxes. If they can't check all of these boxes, this is automatic, you know, ineligibility.
It's check one box, not all of them, isn't it?
No, well, that's for the first half.
Okay.
First
Oh,
half,
you're right. Sorry.
no problem. So then once you do that, that will move you on to the application. So it starts out with the business information, whether, and there are drop boxes. So of course, anywhere you see the symbol for the drop box, you know, just drop down, pick what is appropriate. Here, you know, is it a nonprofit organization? Yes or no? Is it a franchise? And then this is where you put in the financial information. So the gross revenue, cost of goods sold, if applicable. Then, you know, if they have rental properties, you know, if they're in that business, you know, whether it's residential, commercial, for agricultural. Most important thing, any box that's red and has an asterisk also, that has to be completed in order to move forward. And then it continues about the business. Need to put in the date that the business was established, the current ownership. So for example, let's say Steve's Donut Shop was established in January 15th of 1920. Okay. However, there have been ownership changes, and the new owner came in December 1st of 2019. Okay, so the current ownership date would read the December 2019 date. The business established date, as long as it's been in existence, you know, since that time, would be the 1920, you know, example that I gave. Business activity, again, this is a drop down, you know, what is it that the business does? Then it also drops down in terms of the detail of the type of business activity and the number of employees. Then we get to the owner information. And here, anyone who has 20% or more ownership or interest in the business, their information has to be on this application. So let's say I have a business, a partnership, me and 2 other people, each of us own equal shares, so 33 1/3%. All 3 of us must put our information or have our information on this application. So anyone who has 20% or more interest in the business, their information has to be listed.
I was wondering if I could, yeah, can I ask, in the beginning, a couple screens ago, a couple of questions. One was business legal name and trade name. So if someone is a sole proprietor, is their legal name their actual name, and then trade name is, you know, the name of their business. The legal name is their full name of the person.
Okay. So the trade name would normally work like this. When I'm using a fictitious name or doing, so say for example, I have a sole proprietorship, and it's just style. However, I own a flower shop, and the name is Oakland Flower Shop. Okay, so because I wanted to use that name, I had to, or should have, filed a fictitious name statement with the county that is, you know, Steve Dial doing business as Oakland Flower Shop. So in that instance, the Oakland Flower Shop, that's my trade name.
Right, and the legal name is your name as the owner, your first and last name.
Right, if it's a sole proprietorship. But for example,
and then
go ahead.
Oh, well, the other question was just, if you are a sole proprietorship for employees, do you put 1 or 0?
So for employees, normally is considered like actual employees. So if I'm a sole proprietorship and I have no employees, then it's 0. If I have 1 employee, then it's 1. So normally the owner is not considered like in the employee number. And
right,
a sidebar for trade name. So for example, with corporations, someone that may have incorporated, someone that has an LLC, they may be using a trade name. So if I opened up an LLC and it was Steve Dial LLC, okay, technically, right, I'm supposed to use Steve Dial LLC and all things that I do, unless I have a fictitious name statement, which will say, you know, Steve Dial LLC doing business as, you know, the shoe repair. So in that instance, the legal entity is Steve Dial LLC, and the trade name, if I did the, you know, have the fictitious name statement, is, you know, the shoe repair shop. Again, everything that has an asterisk or a red line needs to be completed. Yeah.
Tamara and I both have some questions too,
Sure.
before we go on.
Feel free.
Tamara, I think you had your hand up before me.
Yeah, I just had a question about some slides previous. One question was about the mapping. So if someone in 2019-20 was in a area that was considered low income area, but then had to move because of, you know, the building, they had to move to another location. And now they're not in an area that's considered low income, do they still qualify? And it's on their taxes. The previous address is on their 2019 taxes. That's one question. And then the second question is, if someone applied for the EIDL and they turned down the loan, should they reapply? Should they, what should they do?
Good question.
Okay, so we'll start with the second one. Did they turn down the advance or did they turn down the loan?
They didn't turn down the advance, but they turned down the loan.
Okay, so if the situation is now they want the loan, then they should contact the SBA and request that they reevaluate their application. That now, you know, I decided that I would like to take it. So if you could look at it to see if I still qualify for it, I'd appreciate it. So they should contact the SBA.
But will they still qualify for the advance
Well,
if they got
the
the original
question,
advance?
well, according to the question, they already took an advance.
Okay. Okay.
So again, you know, the advance and the loan are two separate components.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Other question was in terms of the address.
Yeah.
I would suggest that the person calls directly to the SBA. One, for that circumstance, one suggestion could be that they put in the actual address of the business that was impacted where it was at that time. But they're prepared to explain that no longer at that address because, you know, had to move, you know, for whatever reason.
One thing you said, Tamara, I just want to, when you said the address of the 2019 taxes, that wasn't the point of the COVID. So they would probably want to use as a baseline that where they were from that March 2nd, 2020 date. It wouldn't have anything to do with the 2019 taxes because the COVID event didn't start then.
Well,
So,
it was the same. It was the same address.
Okay. No, I'm just saying you had mentioned that the tax for the address of the taxes.
Right, because you're going to look at your you're going to look at your 2019 taxes. So I'm saying those addresses are going to be the same, but this where they are now is not the same as it was when COVID happened.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is that they're looking at where the address was as of that March 2nd date when the COVID started. So it wouldn't have anything to do with when the 2019 tax with that address was filed. Right. The only reason I'm saying is I used to work for the SBA. I used to process EIDL loans. So that's why I'm kind of looking at that. So I kind of know a little bit about it.
Okay. So the question is still if they were in a low income area when COVID hit and now they have moved to.
That's the question. That's the question. Yeah.
So I think the answer is still going to be the same, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
I have another question, but Marissa, did you?
Yes, please. Thank you. And Steve, I hope we have enough time to finish the whole application. I didn't catch when you went through the social security number. What about our immigrant business owners that don't have a social security? Can they put in an ITIN?
Okay, so here, this is the thing. On the application, you see where it says US citizen? Mm-hmm. Someone has to check yes or no. Okay.
Oh, I see.
If they check no, then they meet the criteria to either be qualified, have qualified status, or a national. For qualified status, that includes permanent resident aliens, those that meet the specific requirements, because there's a list of requirements to be qualified status. So qualified status means that there is documentation that that person meets the status. So unfortunately, those that may be in the undocumented category and don't meet qualified status, they won't be eligible.
And what if they check no on US citizen, but have permanent, you said they could qualify with the permanent resident status? But they don't, does that mean they have a social security number? Or what if they still do not have a social security? What should they do with that?
So they'll have a social security number or an I-10, right?
Okay.
Even if I'm using an I-10, I have to have qualified status. So once I check no for US citizen, that triggers that they're going to ask for documentation to make sure that I have qualified status.
Is the qualified status criteria listed somewhere on, or how do they find that out?
Yeah.
So here, give me 1 second.
Thank you.
So it starts on page 171. And if we go down to section B, which starts on page 172, okay? So it states that an alien who's not a qualified alien is not eligible for any federal public benefit, including a loan provided by an agency of the United States. So term qualified alien, number one, alien who is lawfully admitted for permanent residence under the Immigration Nationality Act, alien who is granted asylum under the specific act, a refugee who is admitted. So these are the 7 conditions in terms of what's considered a qualified alien. So that is page 172 starts on section B. What I can do is afterwards, I can send this document to Marissa, and then if you want to share it with the team, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful. I also sorry, go ahead, Harry.
Steve, if you could share the hyperlink where this is, I'd like to add it to our website.
Thank you, Harry.
And I think and I'll get that to you, but I believe it's also in the presentation, but I'll double check and I'll get that to you.
My other question was for property owners who might be receiving rental assistance funds through our emergency rental assistance program. They can also qualify for a loan in advance to cover, that might potentially be covering the same amount.
Okay, so there is a space on the application where it does ask receiving any, other type of compensation for, and if so, what is it? Okay.
Okay.
So that's one thing. The other thing, and that's important, is that especially with any federal program, there cannot be a windfall. So this is where timing becomes important. So an example was, let's say for instance, I applied for the EIDL and I also applied for PPP. It was important that the time frame that I used for expenses for EIDL and expenses for PPP did not overlap. Because I can't get funds to cover the same expenses, but from 2 different sources.
Where do you specify the time frame for on EIDL? Is there a place to do that?
So on EIDL, later in the process, because they have streamlined this application, is when they start asking for documentation. So you have to show an 8-week period. So maybe, you know, third quarter of 2020, that's when I experienced like a 30% difference in revenue, or, you know, or a 50% difference. So I'm just going to show my comparison and my expenses for the third quarter of 2020. So because they streamlined the application, a lot of the documentation is asked after the fact. So if they look at it and say, hey, you look like you're a candidate for the target advance, we would like you to submit X, Y, and Z. So that's why, you know, another piece of it is that people think about timing and also think about documentation.
But that window starts in like March 2020 to now, basically.
Right.
Like that.
So it goes,
Okay.
yeah, it goes from March of 2020. But that period, you know, and especially if I'm looking at, you know, other types of assistance. And again, it was more prevalent, you know, when we had PPP and EIDL kind of at the same time, where people really need to be cognizant of the timing of expenses, that they were, you know, looking for reimbursement for one as opposed to another, you know, facility.
Yeah, actually, it's relevant for me because I'm issuing grants with CDBG funds, so I need to make sure that they're not double dipping as well. I also had just following up from Tamara's question, is that if someone has accepted an advance, but it was for under the previous rules where it was 10 grand or less, and now they have the now there's the supplemental advance, the five grand. I'm just kind of wondering, like, even if you accepted a lower advance than was possible now, you're ineligible. And the second part of it is, I'm curious that my understanding was in the beginning with the EIDL, you were only eligible for $1,000 per employee, and I'm just curious, is that K or the full 15K with just as a sole proprietor, for instance?
Okay.
And would that influence whether you can reapply, even if?
Okay. So I'll start backwards. So that like 1,000 per employee, that's no longer a component of the EIDL. And just to like background it, at that time, because there have been, there were various, reauthorizations that came into play towards the end of the kind of first COVID advance, because they needed to manage the funds that were being put out in terms of the advances. So that 1,000 per employee, that's not applicable anymore. So what they're doing that for that other situation is, say, for example, I applied and it was under that 1,000 per employee, and I only got $1,000. What the SBA has been doing is reviewing all of those applications to see, under the current guidelines, would this person qualify for additional funds under the advance. So that's been the process that they've been doing, and they have a hierarchy in terms of the applications that they've been looking at from from X time. And if people qualify, then they are sending them the invitations. So ideally, those individuals in that situation, they don't need to reapply. The SBA is re-looking at those applications. And if it was, Steve Dial got $1,000 in May of last year, Now, you know, he would qualify for additional $9,000 under the targeted. Then they will review it. Then they'll send me an invitation to get the net, you know, to get that 9,000.
Great, that's very helpful. And then I would imagine that if people are just kind of wondering, you know, to add a little teaser, they could probably use one of those email addresses in the information for applicants section to check, or right? Like,
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
exactly sure which one, but.
Yeah, so there's two separate ones. So one, if, for example, you know, I got something, I wasn't sure if it was from the SBA, but, you know, I think it might have been that invitation, then I want to use the email address for invitations. Hey, could you please check? Here's my original submission number. Did I receive an invitation to apply? The other is to ask to be reevaluated.
So but that's it says applicant seeking reevaluation of a declined application. But if what it is was that they received only 1,000 and think they should have been eligible for much more, or would be eligible for much more, would that still be the reevaluation?
No, because under that last scenario, the SBA has been looking, they've gone back and they've looked at those applications and they're still in the process of looking at them. So ideally, if someone only got 1,000, but now the criteria would bring them up to 10,000, the SBA is reviewing it and then they will send them an invitation. And again, the thing to keep in mind is that as of yesterday, there were approximately 600,000 applications that are backlogged. And those include those that are being relooked at in terms of qualification for the advances. So, and then they are, you know, looking to have that down to 0 by the end of July. So again, just want to factor in that the process that they're using is by invitation. However, they are going back and looking at those that applied early on. Maybe they didn't get the full 10,000. And if they feel that they qualify, they're sending them invitations to apply.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just know that some people are going to be like, I don't want to wait. I want to.
Right. Yeah. But unfortunately, that's currently, you know, how it is.
I don't trust them. I don't trust.
So then you get to step 3. So it's just additional information. And again, it's just important that people read and they understand, because, you know, with, you know, federal loans and grants, you're verifying that this information is correct. And there are different entities that do inspections. So it could be next year, it could be 3 years from now. So understanding, you know, what you're putting in and what you're certifying is important. Then when you get here, important thing, they ask for you that if you're eligible, where do you want us to send the money? What's really important here, people should have the correct routing number. In a lot of instances, if you put in the wrong routing number, it won't let you move forward in the application. So people want to make sure they have the correct bank information. Then once you do that, a summary of the application will pop up. And as long as everything is felt to be correct, you just check, you know, I'm not a robot, and you submit. So some additional, you know, resources are the FAQ documents for both the EIDL Advances and the EIDL loan. What's critical is to make sure that you're looking at the most current version, because as information is updated, they update it by date. So want to make sure that you have the most current version of the FAQs. And I have 2 hands raised, so Marissa?
Yeah, where did we upload the revenue statements, and what sort of documents can help show that? I mean, you could do a bank statement. Does it have to be a bank statement? Are there other alternatives that somebody might have?
So because they streamlined the application, initially they're just taking in the self-reported information.
Oh, wow.
But however, based on that, if they feel, hey, we can move forward with this, that's start asking for documentation. So you're looking at revenue. Again, they're going to ask, you know, for you to sign the 4506, where they can look at your, you know, 2019. So then if people have done their 2020, that's documentation. They haven't, maybe utilizing bank statements that show the revenue that's come in, you know, for that period in 2020. So those are just some of the things that they might be able to use, you know, if they get to the point where, you know, the SBA says, okay, we think we can approve you. Now we need specific documentation.
Okay, so it could be tax returns or bank statements, but you're gonna have to have one or the other.
Right. If they ask, they come back and say, okay, we want, you know, documentation of your revenue for 2020. You know, so ideally, if someone's done their tax returns, that, you know, should be submitted. If not, you might want to see if bank statements over the period where you can highlight the income that, you know, came into the account. So.
And if they don't provide documentation and are not approved for the loan, could they still potentially get the grant?
No, because again, you know, for that invitation for the advance, you are required to submit specific documentation to complete that approval.
But you don't have to be approved for the loan to get the grant. That's why I'm confused.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to be approved for the loan to get the grant, but you still have.
But you do need to still submit documentation.
You still have to meet the eligibility requirements for the grant.
Okay, so then they should anticipate getting an email requesting documentation?
Yeah, so the suggestion is, and just only, you know, for this, but just in general, because with a lot of grant opportunities, loan opportunities, etc., having the financials prepared and ready to go, you know, important. So that would just be a suggestion, you know, that business just has it on the ready.
Thank you.
And Tamara?
Last question. Yeah, it goes back to the application. Some people I know that were sole proprietors, because they didn't know how their business was going to be affected and how long COVID was going to be in existence, they started the EIDL loan, but didn't complete it because they weren't sure if they wanted to take out a loan. So they never finished the loan. So should they reapply for the loan, or should they just call? Should they call, or what should they do?
Okay, so if they submitted the loan and they actually got a submission number, then they should call the SBA. If I was in the middle of the application and was doing it online and I never checked submit, then I should
start over.
It's a new application. But if they submitted docs, you know, or submitted the intention, you know, they should call the SBA. Okay. And so again, you know, and we have already discussed this, just a couple suggestions. So talked about documentation. So people should be prepared, you know, so to have, you know, documentation to support, you know, their revenue loss. They check, you know, the eligibility of location using the mapping tool. and keep all documentation and communication regarding their submission, and especially to keep the submission number, because they will need that number, you know, as they work with the SBA. And with that, if there are any additional questions, and if not, then this concludes our Train the Trainer session. So thank you everyone for your attendance and attention.
Actually, a quick question, sorry, slow to get off mute. In your experience, how long does it take an individual business owner to complete this application?
If someone has all the information, probably no more than 15, 20 minutes tops.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. I'm just trying to figure out if our windows for the workshops are going to be long enough.
Yeah, I would just, you know, suggest just having people prepared to be able to like input that information. So don't wait to show up to think about, hey, what was my, you know, gross revenue? You know, to have that information kind of prior to, and that will facilitate the time it takes to do the application online.
Thank you for that insight. I appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so with that, we will go ahead and conclude. So again, thank you everyone for your attendance and attention.
Thanks, Steve. And if you are not city staff, but you want to join us for one of our in-person sessions and invite your members or clients to come to those sessions, please reach out to Harry or myself, and we look forward to working with you. And
I just want to make sure everyone knows we have a distinct webpage for this. It's oaklandca.gov/EIDL Advance. So as soon as the workshops are finalized, we'll get the information up there as well.